Hello everyone. Welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. Elementary school is a time of innocence and carefree joy. At an age brimming with curiosity about the world, some children unexpectedly become victims of evil. Today's story is about a case that the police investigated for over a decade without identifying the culprit. Yet, in the end, the truth was revealed in a way no one could have anticipated. Now, let's travel back in time to September 3, 2004, the day this case began. Friday, September 3, 2004. On the autumn streets, maple leaves rustled as they fell, blanketing the ground in a tapestry of red and gold. At 2:30 p.m. that day, students at Kia Elementary School in Sayama City, Okayama Prefecture, were attending their end-of-day meeting. This was a brief, routine gathering before dismissal, primarily to recap the day's activities. Teachers would summarize the day and remind students of important details such as homework assignments, schedules, and other notices. That day's meeting held special significance for Chitsuyo Yuko. The 9-year-old third grader had been chosen by her teacher to lead the marching team at the upcoming sports festival. Yuko was overjoyed, filled with enthusiasm, and determined to excel in her role. 10 minutes after the meeting ended, the students quickly packed their bags and left the school. Chitsuyo Yuko walked home, chatting cheerfully with her friends along the way. Her house was about 0.9 miles from the school, a 35-minute walk. On her way home, she encountered a few acquaintances and greeted them warmly. Meanwhile, Chitsuyo Yuko's older sister was also heading home. A high school student, she finished school a bit later than her younger sister, but her school was close to home and she could return quickly by bicycle. At 3:35 p.m., the older sister arrived home, parked her bike in the yard, and stepped inside. For some reason, the atmosphere in the house felt strange. She noticed her younger sister, Chitsuyo Yuko, slumped over the table in the living room, seemingly asleep. Feeling the room was stuffy, she opened a window and called out to her sister, urging her to rest in the bedroom. When Yuko didn't respond after several calls, the older sister approached to check on her. That's when she saw that the back of Yuko's white school uniform was stained red. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was blood. Terrified, the girl immediately contacted their mother, who was working nearby. 10 minutes later, the mother rushed home and called emergency services. They discovered that not only the back of Yuko's uniform, but also her chest and abdomen were covered in large blood stains. 6 minutes later, an ambulance arrived and quickly transported the pale-faced Chitsuyo Yuko to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before reaching the hospital, paramedics tried to gather information, but both the mother and sister were too distraught to speak, only able to sob and call out Yuko's nickname in a heart-wrenching scene that was difficult to witness. After an hour and a half of emergency efforts, Chitsuyo Yuko, the 9-year-old elementary school student, was pronounced dead. The Tsuyama Police Department immediately sprang into action, establishing an investigation headquarters to probe the case. The crime scene was the living room of the Tutsu family home, a space roughly the size of 8 tatama mats, showing no signs of a struggle or ransacking. The only disturbance was a jar of candy on a shelf that had been knocked over with candy scattered everywhere, some even on Tsutsushi Yuko's body. Blood stains were found only where the girl lay. The rest of the house, including other rooms, was clean, indicating the living room was the primary crime scene. The area around the house typically saw little foot traffic, though the road in front of it had heavy vehicle traffic. Apart from the front door, all other entrances were locked. The victim's father, Tsuchiyo Katsuyoshi, explained that the family had a rule. If no one was home when someone left, they were to leave a spare key on the milk crate by the door. However, the spare key was now found discarded near the door, its position altered. The perpetrator may have been familiar with the family's routine and used the spare key to enter through the front door. At the time of crime, the mother was working nearby, the older sister was at school, and the father and grandmother were out shopping. The older sister was the first to return home. As for Tsutsushio Yuko, she had parted ways with a classmate at an intersection around 3 p.m., suggesting she arrived home around 3:15 p.m. In other words, she was attacked during the brief 20 minutes she was alone at home. The forensic report the following day revealed that the victim had 3 deep stab wounds several centimeters long in her right chest, some penetrating her internal organs. There were no defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she didn't resist during the attack. She was fully clothed and showed no signs of sexual assault, with the cause of death determined to be suffocation and excessive blood loss. Based on the shape of the wounds, the murder weapon was a small sharp knife. But it was not found at the scene. The police centered their search around mobilizing over 100 officers to look for the murder weapon while also conducting interviews and gathering statements. However, neighbors reported hearing no unusual sounds. Some had seen Tsutsushio Yuko on her way home from school, with a few noting that she appeared sluggish while walking about 2,300 feet from her house. A passerby saw her near a hair salon 1,600 feet from her home. Normally, Yuko would tap on the salon's window to greet the small dogs inside, but that day she only glanced briefly before walking away. A woman walking her dog saw Yuko walking home alone about 650 feet from her house. Among the roughly 200 witness leads collected, one caught the police's attention. Before the crime occurred, near the Tsutsuyo home, residents spotted a young man with disheveled hair. He was standing under an overpass, grinning foolishly at a girl in the distance. It's unclear whether that girl was Tsushio. The police created a sketch of the suspect based on the witness's description. 4 days after the incident, the victim's father, Tsutsushio Katsuyoshi, held a press conference. In front of a large crowd of reporters, he expressed his deepest wish. Amid his grief, hoping his daughter could come back home. As he spoke, he broke down, tears streaming down his face, his choked sobs rendering him unable to continue. Tsutsushio Katsuyoshi described his daughter as an honest and reliable child, a treasure to the family who never displayed selfish or rebellious behavior, nor caused any trouble. Yuko's mother added that her daughter was a very well-behaved child. Because their house was small, Yuko never had her own room. Yet, she never complained, instead suggesting that her older siblings decorate their rooms. First, in the eyes of her family, Yuko was a radiant sunflower, lovely and bright. Now that light has been extinguished, leaving the family engulfed in darkness. The principal of Kia Elementary School shared that Sutsushio Yuko was always a lively, cheerful girl with natural leadership qualities, destined to become a successful person in the future. But the tragedy struck so suddenly that even now it's hard to believe she's gone. The incident captured widespread public attention, and the police maintained their focus, setting up a hotline and urging citizens to provide information. They distributed flyers and posted notices in high-tra areas. However, these efforts yielded little significant progress. 2 months after the incident, Kia Elementary School held its annual sports festival as planned. Although Tsuchiyo Yuko, who had been chosen as the team leader, couldn't be there, her photo was displayed in the center of the stadium. The sight moved many to tears. On the first anniversary of Yuko's passing, her family and friends gathered to offer flowers in her memory. 50 local residents assembled in a community hall to hear the police update on the case's progress, but the outcome remained the same. We are still reviewing suspects, and the true culprit has not yet been identified. Many expressed their frustration on the spot, speculating that the killer might still be hiding nearby. A mother whose daughter was in second grade shared that her family lived in constant fear and anxiety. If the situation persisted, they would have no choice but to move away. She hoped the case would be resolved soon with the true culprit brought to justice so everyone could feel safe again. The victim's parents were more worried than anyone. Yet, they politely expressed gratitude to the police. They believed that as long as the police didn't give up, there was still hope for solving the case. They emphasized that while their daughter could never return, the perpetrator could still be apprehended. The family didn't want the incident to be forgotten, as that might allow similar crimes against children to happen again. From then on, every year on the anniversary of their daughter's death, Yuko's father distributed flyers seeking witnesses. The family frequently received spontaneous gifts sent from across the country. Each time they received a gift, they would promptly bring it to Tsuchiyo Yuko's grave to comfort her spirit. In 2008, 4 years after the incident, Kia Elementary School held a graduation ceremony. The principal personally presented a diploma to Tsuchiyo. The perpetrator of this crime was cunning, leaving behind very few clues, and seemingly aware of how to evade detection. While the police were investigating, a Japanese online forum began discussing the killer's identity. Some speculated that the culprit was Yuko's older sister, Sutsushio Yuko's clothes were intact and there was no sign of sexual assault, suggesting the motive wasn't robbery or assault. The older sister was the first to discover the scene. And before the police arrived, she was crying uncontrollably. Unable to clearly explain the which seemed somewhat suspicious. Her motive might have been familiar resentment. Possibly jealousy over Yuko, always being praised as adorable with suppressed emotions erupting into a fatal act. Others on the forum pointed out that in 2007, a similar case occurred in Kakegawa City, Ho Prefecture, where a second-grade girl was stabbed to death in front of her home. The method of the crime closely resembled this case, leading some to believe the same perpetrator might be responsible. This theory gained support from several users. It was also noted that in 2010, Ho Prefecture Police arrested an unemployed man who had stabbed a junior high school girl with a knife. He had a prior record of assaulting unfamiliar female students, causing multiple injuries. In that case, his crime scene was very close to the location of Kakagawa incident. Some believe this man could be the culprit behind both crimes. In 2013, 9 years after the incident, Suyama City held its annual coming-of-age ceremony as planned. Students dressed in exquisite kimonos, and they didn't forget Tsutsu Yuko, even discussing what color kimono she might have worn if she were still alive. By 2018, 14 years had passed since Tsutsu Yuko's death. The police had mobilized a total of 60,000 officers to investigate. Yet, the truth remained elusive. In an interview, Yuko's father, Tsutsuyo Katsuyoshi, shared that the family's pain had not subsided, and they still couldn't understand why their daughter was murdered. If she were alive, she would have been 22 years old. But in her father's heart, she would forever remain a third grader. In her memoir, Tsutsu Yuko's mother wrote that every day she stood at the front door during Kia Elementary School's dismissal time, waiting for a miracle to happen. The absence of her daughter left her heartbroken. On some days, she could only cry in despair. Over the past 14 years, she had dreamed of her daughter countless times. She also expressed deep regret, saying that if she had been home at the time of the incident, she might have prevented her daughter's death. In 2004, Japan amended its laws, extending the statute of limitations for serious crimes like murder from 15 years to 25 years. In 2010, this limitation was abolished entirely. The statute of limitations for such cases was changed to allow indefinite prosecution, offering a glimmer of hope for apprehending the killer. Without this legal change, the person who murdered Tsutsu Yuko might have escaped justice. The investigation into the case finally saw a breakthrough. In May 2018, a prisoner serving a sentence suddenly declared that he was the culprit behind the Tsutsu Yuko case from years ago. He specifically chose locations with few surveillance cameras and purchased a knife from a hardware store in advance, indicating that this was a premeditated crime. The man's name was Katsuda Kunihiko, 40 years old, born in Kakagawa City. Both of his parents were former police officers, and he was raised with strict discipline from a young age. During middle school, due to personality issues, he was bullied, ridiculed, and blamed by his peers for an extended period. He began to rebel against his parents, but all he received in return were beatings from his father. Under these circumstances, Katsuda Kunihiko gradually discovered his abnormal fixation. He would often stab himself in the stomach with a knife or cut his arm with a butcher knife. Seeing others bleed filled him with intense excitement and a sense of euphoria. In high school, he became obsessed with female anime characters, but still harbored a desire to see girls' blood or their clothes stained with it as it aroused his impulses. After graduating, he attempted to join the police force, but failed the entrance exam. He then joined the Maritime Self-Defense Force, but unable to adapt to the unit's activities, he left shortly after. He worked various jobs, including factory worker, golf course employee, and security guard for transportation, among others. Those around him had a fairly positive impression of him, describing him as a good kid and someone who greets people politely. However, he was shy and introverted. A middle school classmate recalled that while he wasn't particularly noticeable, he was extremely stubborn and no one could sway his opinions. At 21, Katsuta Kunihiko began his criminal path. He targeted girls around 10 years old using methods such as punching them in the stomach or stabbing them with a screwdriver. At 22, he was arrested by the police for assault and molestation, receiving a suspended sentence. In 2009, he attacked 6 girls in succession and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was released in 2013. In 2015, he resumed his criminal activities on a street in Himeji. He ambushed a female student on her way home from school, grabbed her right arm, and stabbed her multiple times in both arms, chest, and stomach before fleeing the scene. Although he was quickly apprehended by the police, the girl sustained severe injuries, particularly to her arm, and required a month-long hospital stay to recover. Katsuta Kunihiko was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted murder. In 2018, during the 3rd year of his sentence, Katsuta Kunihiko suddenly confessed to killing Tsutsuyo. However, he claimed that the stabbing itself was not his doing. According to his account, on the day of the incident, he happened to see Tsutsuyo Yuko on her way home from school. Finding her cute and charming, he followed her to her house. When she noticed him and screamed in fear, Katsuta Kunihiko, to avoid drawing attention, applied strong pressure to her neck until she stopped breathing. After successfully escaping, he went on to commit crimes across the country, targeting female students on their way home from school, totaling over 100 cases. During interrogations, Katsuta Kunihiko repeatedly changed his statements, making the police investigation increasingly convoluted. He insisted that aside from the stabbing, all other actions were his doing. According to him, after the Tsutsuyo incident, he witnessed another man stab her. The police followed up on his claims, deploying 30 officers to search for 3 days in a 330-feet area 50 feet from the coast of Hirma City, Ho Prefecture. But they found no murder weapon. In reality, 3 years earlier, when he had just been imprisoned, the police had already suspected his involvement in the Tsutsuyo Yuko case and summoned him for questioning multiple times. He was forced to hire a lawyer who advised him that if convicted, he could face the death penalty. The lawyer suggested that if he was guilty, it would be best to confess honestly to potentially reduce his sentence, which led to his self-surrender. After investigation and deliberation, the local prosecutor's office decided to indict him. In October 2021, the case went to trial at the Okayama District Court. Katsuta Kunihiko was charged with murder. At the trial, he reversed his earlier confession, adamantly declaring, "I absolutely didn't do it. I wasn't at the crime scene, nor was I in Sayama City." Tsutsuyo Yuko's older sister testified in court, providing her the day of the incident. At the end of her statement, she broke down in tears. The prosecution pointed out that Katsuta Kunihiko had a particular fetish for harming others to achieve excitement, which served as his motive. The defense attorney, however, argued that Katsuta Kunihiko had undergone multiple psychiatric evaluations. He had previously stabbed himself in the stomach, which led to his fixation on attacking girls in the same way. These behaviors stem from the bullying he endured and his childhood family environment. After committing the crime, Katsuta Kunihiko expressed a desire to apologize and reform, providing leads for the case, and thus his sentence should be considered for leniency. The judge, however, determined that Katsuta Kunihiko had shown a high degree of calculation in his crime, revealing a deeply malicious criminal nature. Although there was no definitive evidence at the crime scene, during the investigation, Katsuta Kunihiko mentioned that he had attacked Tsutsuyo Yuko with 1 strike from his left hand and 3 from his right, which matched the condition of her wounds. After a lengthy series of legal proceedings, 2 years later, in September 2023, the court delivered its verdict. Katsuta Kunihiko was convicted of murder and other charges. One of the officers involved in the investigation expressed gratitude to all the citizens who continuously followed the case, stating that after years of relentless investigation, the case had finally been resolved, allowing Tsutsuyo Yuko's soul to rest in peace. But on the other side, after the verdict was delivered, Katsuta Kunihiko continued to insist that he had no intention of harming anyone, claiming the punishment was too harsh. However, a year later, in a letter to a media reporter, he admitted to his deliberate actions. Additionally, he confessed to 2 more cases. One of these incidents took place in 2006 in Tatsuno City, Ho Prefecture. He had targeted a girl riding her bike home on a street in front of a cram school. He approached her to strike up a conversation, and when she got off her bike, he attempted to steal her backpack, but she resisted. He then pulled out a knife and attacked her, stabbing her in the chest and left arm. The terrified girl ran into the cram school and told her teacher, who immediately contacted the police and took her to the hospital. Upon examination, the wound had penetrated her lung, but fortunately, it was not life-threatening. Based on the girl's statement and witness testimonies, the police created a sketch of the suspect, but with limited leads, the case remained unsolved. The other incident occurred in Kakegawa City, Ho Prefecture. On an evening in 2007, 7-year-old Yusi Yuzuki was playing with friends in a park 1,600 feet from her home. After parting ways with her friends, she returned home and parked her bike in the yard. But as she stepped out of the house, Katsuta Kunihiko rushed in and attacked her. At the time, 4 people were inside the house. Hearing her screams, they ran out, prompting Katsuta Kunihiko to flee. UCI had been stabbed in the chest and abdomen, sustaining severe injuries. On the way to the hospital in an ambulance, paramedics asked her about the assailant's appearance. In broken words, UCI managed to say, "Alt, man, adult," before losing consciousness. After an hour and a half of emergency treatment, she passed away. That night, UCI's grieving family along with the police distributed over 1,000 flyers to passers-by seeking leads. The forensic report revealed that the chest wound on Yusi Yuzuki was 0.8 in wide, piercing her heart. The stab wound was nearly horizontal with the blade angled upward, indicating she was attacked from behind. The cause of death was excessive blood loss. The police classified this as a murder case and established an investigation headquarters. They found 200 ml of blood at the crime scene, while the average blood volume for a girl her age is about 2,200 milliliters. In other words, UCI had lost over 10% of her blood, a figure that underscores the horrifying brutality of the perpetrator. Following the incident, the elementary school UCI Yuzuki attended implemented a policy of group travel to and from school, and police patrol cars were deployed for protection. Elementary schools across Hyoko Prefecture followed suit, adopting similar measures. The Kakagawa Police Department was determined to apprehend the culprit. A reward of 3 million yen was offered. But like the Tsuchiyo case, the investigation saw no progress. 17 years after the incident in 2024, the police had mobilized over 50,000 personnel for the investigation and collected more than 500 witness statements, yet still had no results. It wasn't until Katsuda Kunihiko confessed from prison that the truth came to light. Katsuda Kunihiko claimed that the weapon used to kill Yoshiyuki had been thrown into the sea in Harama town. The police began a search in the nearby coastal area at around 10 a.m. on January 21. Professional divers equipped with metal detectors joined the effort, but they found nothing. When Katsuda Kunihiko first admitted his involvement in the Tsuchiyo case, a reporter visited his father's home to investigate. His father, a former police officer, was now suffering greatly from illness. He expressed shame over his son's actions and pleaded with the reporter not to inform him if his son was linked to more cases, asking to be left in peace to live out his remaining years. Before Katsuda Kunihiko's confession, many forum users had speculated about the killer's identity. And some had indeed guessed correctly. As early as 2011, someone had pointed out that the circumstances of the UCI Yuzuki case closely resembled the Tsutsuyuko case, suggesting the same perpetrator might be responsible. In 2015, after Katsuda Kunihiko's arrest, another user explicitly stated that he was the true culprit. Many expressed frustration with the police's inefficiency, believing that if the police had taken these speculations seriously, more victims might have been saved. However, others argued that without concrete evidence, the police couldn't arbitrarily arrest someone. Their only options were to conduct inquiries or increase patrols. The lives of the victims could not be saved, and the surviving girls were left with lasting psychological trauma. Fortunately, the court's verdict ensured that the perpetrator faced justice and the scales of justice were balanced. And so, today's case comes to a close. Reflecting on the entire case, it's clear that the perpetrator committed heinous crimes, taking the lives of innocent children. The case inflicted immeasurable pain on the victims' families and left an indelible scar on the hearts of the Japanese public. The actions of the perpetrator in this case are unforgivable. However, the verdict has sparked public debate about the severity and deterrent effect of Japan's legal system. Some believe the punishment was fitting, while others argue that the sentence was too lenient given the gravity of his crimes. Story 2. Russia is home to countless beautiful nature parks, often frequented by locals for sightseeing and relaxation. However, one park in this country was once dubbed the Park of the Devil because it became the scene of over 40 tragic murders, all committed by a single perpetrator. In the southern region of Moscow lies a vast nature park known as Bidki Forest Park. It's a well-known spot that attracts many locals. The park's name originates from a river that flows through the area. Legend has it that in ancient times, this forest was a playground for the nobility. Today, the park still retains numerous historical traces, giving visitors the sensation of stepping into a page of ancient history where the past and present intertwine. Our story begins on October 15, 2005, a Saturday amidst the radiant golden hues of autumn. While patrolling the forest, two officers from the Moscow Patrol Unit were walking along familiar trails. They were performing their duties while savoring the pleasant atmosphere of the autumn afternoon. Suddenly, they froze. Ahead, amidst rustling dry leaves, a human body lay sprawled on the ground. The officers rushed forward. Though the smell wasn't overpowering, the sight before them sent chills down their spines. The victim's face had been crushed beyond recognition. Even more horrifying, a vodka bottle was deeply embedded in the back of the victim's head. Immediately, backup forces were dispatched to the scene. Leading the operation was none other than the Moscow police chief. They scoured every inch of the surrounding area, searching for any clue that might identify the victim, but not a single item was found to confirm the deceased's identity. The vodka bottle lodged in the victim's head was pristine, bearing no fingerprints. After the autopsy, forensic experts concluded the victim was a man, approximately 30 to 40 years old. The cause of death was severe traumatic brain injury due to a forceful impact to the head, resulting in a shattered skull and ruptured arteries. The time of death was estimated to be about 3 years prior. Based on missing persons records, the police identified the victim as Maksany Oiki. However, the case quickly hit a dead end. There was no evidence to trace the perpetrator. A month later, near the location where the first body was found, a hiker in the forest stumbled upon another body. This time, the victim was an elderly man around 60 to 65 years old. The autopsy revealed he had died 2 to 3 years earlier, with the cause of death mirroring the previous case, a shattered skull and severed arteries. In the days that followed, more bodies were discovered. By the end of December 2005, the police had found a total of 7 victims in Bidki Forest. None of the bodies had been buried. The victims' remains were simply discarded on the forest floor, exposed to the wild elements. Yet, a strange pattern emerged. All the victims had their heads crushed with either a vodka bottle or a wooden stake driven into the back of their skulls. Notably, there were no signs of assault or any motive related to robbery. The series of gruesome murders sent waves of terror through the community. After piecing together the clues, the police reached a chilling conclusion. Only a serial killer could be behind it all. While the perpetrator remained at large, the local population lived in abject fear, unsure who would be the next victim. News of a killer lurking in the park spread rapidly throughout the area. The usual vibrancy of the forest faded, replaced by a grim and icy atmosphere. The rustling of the trees and the wind no longer brought a sense of peace, only amplifying the eerie desolation. Locals no longer dared to walk alone, and many avoided leaving their homes after dark. Given the severity of the case, the Moscow Police Department formed a special investigation unit, enlisting the best investigators to hunt down the culprit. During the investigation, they discovered a psychiatric hospital near the park. The hypothesis emerged: could the killer be an escaped mental patient? hiding in the shadows during the day and emerging at night to strike their victims. The police immediately conducted a thorough sweep of the hospital, reviewing patient records and interviewing medical staff. However, no useful leads were uncovered. The killer remained an invisible phantom, leaving no trace. 2 months later, Russia's top forensic experts analyzed the victim's skull fragments. Based on the shape and extent of the damage, they determined that the murder weapon was likely a sledgehammer or a similarly heavy object. While this clue was significant, it still wasn't enough to identify the perpetrator. 4 months after the discovery of the first victim, an unexpected event unfolded. During a routine patrol in the park, police requested identification from a man who was walking. To their surprise, the man suddenly bolted. The officers immediately gave chase. The pursuit stretched on until one officer fired a shot, striking the man in the thigh and subduing him on the spot. After he was taken to the hospital for treatment, the man explained that he thought he was being robbed, which caused him to panic and flee. The incident turned out to be an unfortunate misunderstanding. A month later, the police noticed another individual acting strangely. It was a person dressed in women's clothing, hurrying toward a lake in the park, constantly looking over their shoulder as if fleeing from something. The police intercepted the individual. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a man disguised as a woman. He claimed that he suffered from a compulsion to wear women's clothing and was afraid of being attacked, which explained his suspicious behavior. However, when the police searched his bag, they found a hammer. Facing intense questioning from the investigators, he explained that he was often discriminated against and even beaten. So, he carried the hammer for self-defense. While his explanation seemed plausible, the police weren't entirely convinced. The man was taken to the station for further investigation. Ultimately, the verification process confirmed he had no connection to the series of murders. The nightmare showed no signs of ending. Over the next 6 months, 5 more victims were discovered in the forest, bringing the total to 12. The victims included both men and women with no age restriction, though most were elderly men. The emergence of this killer plunged the entire city of Moscow into a state of panic. The media dubbed him the Bitsky Park Killer. The case became one of the longest and most haunting investigations in Moscow police history. Despite their best efforts, they still couldn't identify the monster behind this string of savage crimes. But then a critical turning point emerged. The officers immediately gave chase. The pursuit stretched on until one officer fired a shot, striking the man in the thigh and subduing him on the spot. After he was taken to the hospital for treatment, the man explained that he thought he was being robbed, which caused him to panic and flee. The incident turned out to be an unfortunate misunderstanding. A month later, the police noticed another individual acting strangely. It was a person dressed in women's clothing, hurrying toward a lake in the park, constantly looking over their shoulder as if fleeing from something. The police intercepted the individual. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a man disguised as a woman. He claimed that he suffered from a compulsion to wear women's clothing and was afraid of being attacked, which explained his suspicious behavior. However, when the police searched his bag, they found a hammer. Facing intense questioning from the investigators, he explained that he was often discriminated against and even beaten. So, he carried the hammer for self-defense. While his explanation seemed plausible, the police weren't entirely convinced. The man was taken to the station for further investigation. Ultimately, the verification process confirmed he had no connection to the series of murders. The nightmare showed no signs of ending. Over the next 6 months, 5 more victims were discovered in the forest, bringing the total to 12. The victims included both men and women with no age restriction, though most were elderly men. The emergence of this killer plunged the entire city of Moscow into a state of panic. The media dubbed him the Bedtime Park Killer. The case became one of the longest and most haunting investigations in Moscow police history. Despite their best efforts, they still couldn't identify the monster behind the string of savage crimes. But then a critical turning point emerged. Alexander was born in 1974 in Medvo, Moscow. At just 10 months old, his father abandoned the family, leaving the infant in the care of a neglectful mother who was consumed by extramarital affairs. The only person who genuinely cared for him was his grandfather. To young Alexander, his grandfather was his entire world. But fate was unkind. At the age of 4, a tragic accident struck, forever altering the course of his life. While playing on a swing, Alexander fell backward, slamming his head onto the concrete ground. From then on, he developed a stutter. His handwriting became illegible, and he lost control over his behavior. Classmates began to torment him, bullying him relentlessly and calling him __. Alexander grew increasingly volatile, quick to erupt, ready to lash out at anyone who crossed him. Fearing her son had psychological issues, his mother enrolled him in a special school for children with learning difficulties. But this decision may have pushed the boy deeper into darkness. Alexander's grandfather fiercely opposed his mother's choice. He believed the boy wasn't deficient. He was simply trapped in an unsuitable environment. With that conviction, he encouraged Alexander to engage in activities that challenged his mind. It was through this that Alexander discovered the greatest passion of his life, chess. When he touched the chess pieces, Alexander felt transported to another world, a place where no one could bully him, a place where he could triumph through his intellect alone. Over time, Alexander became a skilled chess player. He frequently visited Bsky Forest to challenge local experts. But unbeknownst to anyone, something far more sinister than his love for chess was brewing within him. As he grew older, Alexander enrolled in a vocational school, training to become a carpenter. But he struggled to fit into society. An old friend once recalled, Alexander didn't know how to make friends. He would lend money to others, but with a bizarre condition. If they didn't repay on time, they had to take their own life. No one took his words seriously. Yet when the deadline arrived, everyone made sure to pay him back. It seemed that even from a young age, Alexander harbored a desire to control others' fates. But as he reached the cusp of adulthood, his life took a tragic turn. His beloved grandfather passed away with an already impaired mind and a deep-seated resentment toward the world. The loss of his most cherished person drove Alexander into despair and madness. He began drinking heavily. He visited Betsky Forest not just to play chess but to indulge in a new pastime. At first, Alexander targeted stray children, intimidating them and forcing them to do his bidding. But soon he felt that wasn't enough. On one occasion, Alexander grabbed a child, held him by the legs, and dangled him upside down in the air. Staring into a camera lens, he snarled, "You're in my hands now. I'll throw you out the window. A 50-foot fall will kill you." Though he ultimately didn't follow through, releasing the terrified child, he obsessively rewatched the video he had recorded. Those images captivated him. In every frame, he felt like a god, holding the power of life and death over another. The sensation was intoxicating. Not long after, a notorious case that shook Russia caught Alexander's attention. The crimes of the Rostov butcher. The culprit, Andrei Chikatilo, had committed a total of 53 murders, making him the most infamous serial killer of the Soviet era. The story of the Rostov butcher profoundly influenced Alexander's psyche. He idolized Chikatilo, mimicking his style of dress and collecting countless articles about the case. A chilling thought began to take root in Alexander's mind. He wanted to surpass Chikatilo. He wanted to break his record for the number of victims. And so a barbaric plan began to take shape. To execute it, Alexander decided to recruit a former classmate, Mkhy Odishuk. When Alexander shared his plan, Mkhy wasn't alarmed. Instead, he enthusiastically agreed, declaring, "I want to kill, too. It's my dream." This response delighted Alexander. The two discussed and agreed to use a hammer as their weapon of choice. But as time passed, Mkhy realized Alexander wasn't joking. He genuinely intended to kill. Terrified, Mkhy wanted to back out. But how could he escape such a ruthless predator? Mkhy decided to feign continued interest to avoid arousing Alexander's suspicion. But his anxious eyes and hesitation didn't go unnoticed. From then on, during every meeting, Mkhy focused on finding a way to escape while Alexander plotted to eliminate this traitor. On July 27, 1992, the plan reached its climax. Alexander lured Mkhy to bits of forest under the pretense of a casual walk. As they passed an abandoned well, Alexander suddenly pulled a nylon rope from his coat pocket, wrapped it around Mikhail's neck, and tightened it with force. Despite the victim's desperate struggles, Alexander kept strangling him until Mkhy stopped breathing. He then dragged the body to the well and tossed it in like a piece of garbage. Afterward, he calmly walked away from the scene as if nothing had happened. Later, Alexander reminisced about his first murder with a nostalgic glint in his eye. "It was my first time. It felt like a first love, something I'll never forget." And what made it even more significant was that he committed the act on the very day he turned 18. To Alexander, it was the perfect coming-of-age gift. Mkhy's family reported him missing to the police shortly after his disappearance. An investigation was launched and Alexander immediately became a suspect. Several witnesses confirmed that Mkhy was last seen with Alexander before vanishing. The police quickly summoned him for questioning. But throughout the interrogation, Alexander maintained an eerily calm demeanor, insisting, "I don't know anything. We just went for a walk and then parted ways." Lacking sufficient evidence, the police were forced to release him. In his first murder, Alexander had evaded justice flawlessly. This realization only intensified his desire to become a serial killer. From that day forward, Alexander began training his physical strength, preparing for the murders to come. He also worked on his social skills to more easily approach potential victims. Then news that further fueled his excitement emerged. In 1996, Russia temporarily suspended the death penalty. This meant that no matter how many crimes he committed, he wouldn't face execution. Now Alexander had nothing to fear. He was ready to embark on his path of crime. In 2001, Alexander felt the time was ripe. On a day in May, he was playing chess in the forest park with a 52-year-old man named Yevgeny. After the game, Alexander suddenly suggested, "Today is the anniversary of my pet dog's death. Would you come with me to the pet cemetery to commemorate it?" The man, without a hint of suspicion, agreed. The two walked into a remote area of the forest. When they arrived, Alexander pointed to an empty patch of ground, claiming it was his pet's burial site. He then pulled out a bottle of vodka, poured it into 2 glasses, and raised a toast with the man to a dog that never existed. As the vodka slid down the man's throat before he could react, a loud thud echoed through the air. Alexander had leapt to his feet, smashing the vodka bottle directly onto the man's head. The man collapsed to the ground, blood staining the grass crimson. Following a familiar ritual, Alexander dragged the body to a nearby well and pushed it in without hesitation. Back home, he took out his chessboard and marked the first square, a symbol of his victory. Over the next 4 years, Alexander continued his brutal game. Each time he killed, he recorded the date on his chessboard. With every victim that fell, another square was filled. By September 2005, his chessboard bore 36 marked squares representing 36 lives he had taken. His victims were primarily homeless individuals and the elderly. His method was always the same. He would act friendly, offer drinks, then strike with ruthless precision. At first, he used a vodka bottle or a wooden stick to bash his victims' heads. But over time, he grew bolder. He began driving weapons directly into their skulls and disposing of the bodies and sewer pipes. This caused severe issues for the city's wastewater system. Sanitation workers reported the problem to the police. But since the victims were mostly people with no one to claim them, the investigations led nowhere. Alexander became increasingly bloodthirsty. Despite having killed dozens, he still hadn't gained the recognition he craved. Frustration and disappointment began to set in. He recalled the weapon he and his old friend had initially chosen, the hammer. In October 2005, Alexander visited a store, carefully selecting the perfect hammer. From that moment on, he stopped hiding his victims' bodies. He even left the hammer at the crime scenes, a direct challenge to the police. He wanted all of Russia to know his name. By June 2006, with just 3 squares left to complete his chessboard, Alexander was apprehended by the police. In September 2007, exactly 15 years after his first murder, the trial officially commenced. Alexander was charged with 49 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He nonchalantly claimed the true number of victims was 61. But regardless of how Many lives were taken. The self-proclaimed Grandmaster of Death could never win the twisted game he had created. 3 individuals miraculously survived Alexander's attacks, a fact he only learned during the trial. When the prosecutor mentioned the living witnesses, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Part unwillingness, part disappointment. The first survivor was a pregnant woman attacked in February 2002. She had intended to buy a camera from Alexander, and he lured her to a well in the park, claiming the camera was hidden below. Without suspicion, she bent down to look. Seizing the moment, Alexander suddenly pushed her into the well. Seeing that she was still alive, he ruthlessly smashed her head against the well's edge multiple times before walking away. Miraculously, the woman survived and her unborn child was unharmed. However, as an undocumented immigrant, she did not report the incident to the police. The second survivor was a young athlete attacked in March 2002. Alexander used the same tactic, shoving him into a well. The young man survived and reported the assault to the police. But with no evidence, the case quickly faded into obscurity. The third survivor was Alexander's neighbor, attacked in November 2003. He struck the man 3 times in the back of the head with a hammer, then threw him into a well and left. Though the survived, he suffered a traumatic brain injury, losing all memory of the incident. At the trial, Alexander was handcuffed with his hands behind his back, seated in a special glass enclosure. Before the judge, he showed no remorse, even arrogantly declaring, "This court may decide my fate, but I decided the fate of 61 others. I am greater than the judge, for I hold the power over life and death." Among his victims were several people he knew. Alexander confessed that killing acquaintances gave him a greater thrill. He likened murder to a basic need. Not being able to take a life is like being deprived of food. Leaving the bodies in public spaces was his way of taunting the police. He took pleasure in boasting about his methods, even experimenting with crafting new weapons to continue his crimes. During interrogations, Alexander occasionally became agitated, his statements growing erratic and contradictory. He underwent a psychiatric evaluation, but the results confirmed he was fully competent to stand trial. From a legal perspective, it's worth noting that being deemed mentally sane does not mean an individual has no psychological issues. Some of Alexander's traits may align with a personality disorder, but this was insufficient to exempt him from criminal responsibility. Given the exceptional severity of the case, the trial was open to the public. Outside, hundreds of reporters and curious onlookers gathered to follow the proceedings. After over a month of deliberation, in October 2007, the Moscow City Court delivered its verdict. Alexander was convicted of 49 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and mandated to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment. His mother broke down in tears in the courtroom, refusing all interviews. Still, she maintained that her son did not deserve such a sentence. Alexander's sentencing sparked heated debates in Russia about reinstating the death penalty. Some argued that a life for a life was just, while others believed in upholding the right to life, even for the most heinous criminals. The debate rages on, but for Alexander, it's over. The man who saw himself as a god must now spend the rest of his days behind bars. The brutality and complexity of Alexander's case sent shockwaves around the world. His depravity not only sparked public outrage, but also ignited curiosity among those fascinated by serial killers. This story has been adapted multiple times into films and documentaries retelling the horrific crimes Alexander committed. Some reporters were granted access to the prison where Alexander is serving his sentence to interview him. When asked if he regretted his actions, he replied bluntly, "I do have regrets, but only because I was caught too soon." For this man, the greatest regret wasn't the loss of innocent lives, but his failure to surpass the victim count of his idol. Andrei Chikatilo, the notorious serial killer known as the Rostov Butcher. Despite his life sentence, Alexander has not abandoned his desire to continue his crimes. He once stated, "If I were released, the first thing I'd do is kill a few more people to relieve the pressure." He even planned to acquire a chessboard with 100 squares and fill it with human lives. To Alexander, human lives held no value. Throughout his killing spree, he never cared who his victims were, where they came from, or what their lives were like. The only thing that mattered to him was the number. During the trial, he brazenly demanded the court raise the number of victims he was charged with from 49 to 61, but this request was denied. The rejection infuriated him, as if the title of the greatest killer had been stolen from him. Contrary to what one might expect of a man serving a life sentence, Alexander seems quite content with prison life. He adapted quickly and even made bizarre remarks about the facility. "The water here is very clean and the climate is warm." In 2016, after 11 years in prison, Alexander even married a woman. Perhaps for this man, crime was the path to what he saw as a success. But for society, it remains an enduring nightmare. Alexander may have achieved his goal of killing for personal satisfaction, but he couldn't escape justice. His cruelty and arrogance have only deepened society's contempt, turning him into a symbol of the darkest distortions of the human psyche. Though he is imprisoned for life, is this truly a fitting punishment for someone who took dozens of innocent lives? Or should he have faced a harsher consequence? This question remains a topic of debate, not just in Russia, but worldwide. Story 3. A frigid winter night enveloped a Daka ward, Tokyo. Amid the serene atmosphere of a residential area east of Tannery Park, no one could have imagined that this place was about to become the scene of a horrific crime. In January 1996, at a desolate parking lot, police discovered the brutally murdered body of a woman. The clues left at the scene quickly led them to a name, Ono Yuzuo. This name had once sent shockwaves through Japanese society. 20 years earlier, Ono had been accused in a series of chilling cases involving young women. But a dramatic turn in the courtroom transformed him from a convicted killer into a wrongfully accused hero. Had true justice been served, or was it all a carefully orchestrated charade? Now, as blood spilled once more, the specter of the past resurfaced. Was Ono Yuzuo truly innocent? Or had justice let a dangerous predator slip through the cracks? Adaka Ward, one of the northernmost wards of Tokyo, Japan, is renowned for its lush natural scenery. It's home to Tannery Park, one of the largest parks among Tokyo's 23 wards, offering a precious retreat for the city's busy urban dwellers. East of Tannery Park lies the residential neighborhood of Higashi Rokugitsuko. Yet beneath Adaka's tranquil facade lurk terrifying shadows. A gruesome crime that would shake Tokyo to its core. On a freezing Tuesday, January 9, 1996, in a parking lot in Higashi Rokugitsuko, Adaka Ward, local residents were horrified to discover a strange object. A human-shaped figure wrapped in an old blanket. As they approached, they recoiled in terror at the ghastly sight. Police arrived swiftly at the scene. After receiving the report, inside the blanket was the body of a woman who had been burned, her head missing. Forensic examiners found the perpetrator's DNA on the blanket, and the method of the crime bore a haunting resemblance to a series of shocking cases that had rocked Tokyo 20 years earlier. Back then, 10 consecutive murders targeted young women in their 20s who were assaulted and then set ablaze. The prime suspect in those earlier cases, Ono Yojuo, had a criminal record for theft and arson and had been spotted near the crime scenes multiple times. Yet, he was ultimately acquitted. Now, in the parking lot case, the police quickly identified the victim, Mio Yoshi, a 41-year-old woman from Ibaraki Prefecture. After losing her job, she left her hometown, drifting to a dachi ward in Tokyo, where she slept in Tannery Park at night. Ono, who worked as a cleaner at Tannery Park, had known Yoshi and lived with her. His home was not far from the parking lot. Neighbors reported that a few months earlier, they had seen him bring a middle-aged woman to his house. However, just days before the murder, they heard loud arguments erupting from Ono's residence. After that, the woman disappeared. Ono, a man with a prior conviction for theft, had served 2 years in prison. After his release, he moved to Adaka Ward. The police searched his home and found a blanket with characteristics matching the one discovered at the crime scene. With mounting evidence, Ono quickly became the prime suspect. So, who is the real Ono? Was he connected to the series of horrific murders that terrorized Tokyo 20 years ago? To answer these questions, we need to travel back in time to the moment he was born. In 1936, Ono Etsuya was born in Kidora village, Ibaraki Prefecture, now part of Namagatata City. His mother, a hard-working farmer, became a widow just 6 days after her marriage. Refusing to be defeated by fate, she toiled tirelessly, running a dried fish shop, while tending to the fields to support her children. She later had 6 more children with different men. Ono's biological father passed away before he was born, leaving his childhood devoid of a father figure. In the family, he had only one full sibling, a sister, while the rest were half-siblings from his mother's other relationships. Despite his mother's income from the business, the burden of feeding 6 mouths kept the family in the constant financial strain. This hardship profoundly shaped Ono's character. He despised school and quickly fell into a habit of theft, often stealing items to sell for money. His academic performance in middle school was dismal, with nearly all subjects below average except for physical education. In a 240-day school year, he skipped 60 days on average, missing 1 day for every 4. On the days he didn't attend school, he helped with household chores and seized opportunities to commit petty theft. Eventually, he dropped out entirely, never completing junior high school. Later, Ono Yojuo's family moved to Tokyo, marking a turning point in his life. He started working, taking a job at a pachinko parlor, but quit after just 1 month. From there, he became addicted to pachinko, spending at least 3,000 yen per session, rapidly draining his funds. To sustain his habit, he began stealing in residential areas until he was caught and sent to a reformatory for a year. After his release, Ono showed no signs of reform and continued his thieving ways. At 26, he was arrested for breaking into a home and sentenced to prison. Upon release, not only did he fail to change, but he also started committing arson. Almost every few months, he was arrested and jailed. Each time he was released, he found temporary work, drifting between the homes of various relatives. Over the years in Tokyo, he was arrested a total of 14 times, convicted 8 times, and served nearly 13 years in prison. He became a notorious criminal, a familiar face to local police. In 1968, at the age of 32, Ono was released. But just a few months later, a series of horrific serial murders began in the capital region. That sweltering summer, a 26-year-old female employee became the victim of a brutal murder in a grassy area near a tennis court by a Yasi station in Adaka Ward, Jr. Joban Line. The victim was burned and there were signs of assault. Witnesses reported seeing flames in the early hours of the morning of the murder. 2 days later, an anonymous call came in informing the police that the culprit was none other than Ono Yojuo, who had recently been released from prison. From 1973 to 1974, a string of 9 similar cases unfolded across Tokyo, Saitama, and Chiba. The victims were primarily young women, and one Oetsuwa was coincidentally spotted near the crime scenes, notably in the Mabushi area of Matsuda City, Chiba Prefecture. 3 horrific murders occurred within a single month. A 19-year-old female employee and a 30-year-old housewife went missing, later found murdered. At the scenes, traces of typo blood matching Ono Yotsu's blood type were discovered. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling truth. Just before these murders, Ono Yojuo had been sneaking into the area to steal, using ladders to break into apartments and steal valuable items. Was Ono Yotsuo truly the perpetrator behind the series of gruesome murders? Were these cases connected? These haunting questions plagued Japanese police for years. On August 2, another similar case occurred involving an office worker in Adaka Ward, Tokyo. The perpetrator was determined to have type O or B blood. A witness reported seeing a suspicious man fleeing the scene. He was about 170 centimeters tall, wearing a dress shirt, and around 40 years old, a description that matched Ono. Just 3 days later, another office worker in Shiki City, Saitama Prefecture, became a victim. Between 1968 and 1974, a total of 10 similar cases occurred in the capital region. These crimes shared many similarities, reflecting the severe social insecurity during a time when Japan was experiencing rapid economic growth. In reality, Ono had long been on the police's radar, but they lacked direct evidence. Footprints found at the scene of the murder of Miyata Sai, a 21-year-old teacher, could only prove his presence at the crime scene. Just as the police hit a dead end a month later, Ono was arrested for theft in the Matsudo area. This was a golden opportunity for the police to interrogate him. At the station, Ono Yojuo confessed to his crimes. He admitted that around 10:30 p.m. that night, he saw the victim on her way home. He lured her into a building under construction where he attacked her. Initially, he intended to take her home, but she screamed for help and tried to flee. In a panic, he used her clothing cord to strangle her and buried her body at the construction site. Based on his confession, the police recovered the victim's umbrella, wallet, clothes, and other belongings near a nearby riverbank. As news of the case spread, the media erupted, portraying Ono Yotsuo as a demon hiding behind a gentle facade. Although many questions remained unanswered, in the eyes of the public, he had become a notorious serial killer. However, as the investigation deepened, the police discovered that 2 of the 10 cases had different perpetrators. The fire at a restaurant in Katsushika Ward, Tokyo in July, was actually a murder robbery, and the culprit had already been apprehended. The Shiki City case in Saitama in August, despite Ono's confession, showed blood at the scene as type A or AB, while his blood type was O. Furthermore, the victim's boyfriend, who had a matching blood type, had met her the night before the murder. These details raised a significant question. Was Ono Yotsuo truly the mastermind behind the series of horrific murders in the capital? In March 1975, 6 months after the Miyata-sai case, Ono suddenly retracted his confession, adamantly claiming his innocence. He accused the police of using coercive tactics to force him into a false confession. At the same time, Japanese society was abuzz with the infamous Sama case. The suspect, Ishiwa Kazuo, a man with a criminal record, had initially confessed but later withdrew his statement, alleging police coercion. Because Ishiwa Kazuo came from a lower social class, his case garnered widespread public sympathy and support. Ono's situation bore striking similarities. However, some investigative journalists uncovered that from the outset, the police had dismissed the possibility that Ono belonged to a disadvantaged class. Instead, they focused on building a case against him, tailoring their investigation to secure a guilty verdict. This raised serious doubts about the fairness of the legal process. For various reasons, Ono Yojuo's trial faced repeated delays. While awaiting trial, he remained in custody. By 1979, after 5 years of detention, he published a book detailing his experiences and expressing his longing for a happy life. He wrote about his close bond with his family's younger generations and his desire for a true home. These heartfelt words resonated deeply with many readers. Ono's reflection stirred public sentiment, leading some to believe that Mr. Ono was a kind-hearted, emotional, middle-aged man, making it hard to imagine him committing such heinous crimes. Much like the Sama case, the Ono case captured significant public attention. A support group called the Ono Relief Association was formed with members firmly believing in his innocence and actively advocating on his behalf. They pointed out that the blood test results from the Miyata crime scene might not be entirely reliable as the victim's body had been burned. Even if the blood type matched, it was only circumstantial evidence. The most critical evidence against Ono Yojuo was his confession and the physical items the police recovered based on that. Confession. However, these pieces of evidence were riddled with inconsistencies. After the murder was discovered, the police conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area, but found none of the victim's belongings. Yet, 100 days later, those items were suddenly discovered exactly as Ono Yojiro had described in his confession. The umbrella was found just 650 feet from the crime scene, and the wallet was located by the riverbank within the initial search radius. These items should have been found during the first search, but they weren't. More crucially, there were questions about the legality of the police interrogations. If it could be proven that Ono Yojiro's confession was coerced, it would deal a significant blow to the principle of presumed guilt. Consequently, the Relief Association focused on the issue of temporary detention to defend Ono Yojiro, raising questions about the authenticity of his confession. Temporary detention is a unique aspect of Japan's judicial system, where some suspects are held at police stations rather than in prisons or detention centers before formal charges are filed. In this environment, the police have complete control over interrogations, making suspects vulnerable to coercion and increasing the risk of false confessions. In July 1986, the Miyata Sanai case went to trial at the Chiba District Court's Matsudo branch. The defendant, Ono Yotsuo, was charged with murder. After 2 months of proceedings, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Ono immediately appealed, firmly rejecting the verdict. Although he was only charged in one case, some media outlets still implied that Ono Yotsu was a serial killer, subtly holding him accountable for other murders. The Ono Relief Association launched a vigorous campaign to protest this defamation, calling for public attention. This became a key factor in prompting an appeal trial. 5 years later, in April 1991, the appeal trial opened at the Tokyo High Court. At the trial, the prosecution relied on the confession and physical evidence to affirm Ono Yojiro's guilt. However, the defense raised doubts about the methods used to obtain the confession, pointing out that Ono Yotsuo had been held in isolation under harsh conditions and subjected to prolonged, relentless interrogations, which likely led to coercion. At the time, Japan was navigating the lost decade following the collapse of the bubble economy. Society was undergoing a shift in values with a growing demand for justice and fairness. Ultimately, the court ruled that due to coercion, the defendant's confession lacked voluntariness and reliability, thereby overturning Ono Yojiro's murder conviction. However, he was still sentenced to 6 years in prison for theft and assault. Having already been detained for a total of 17 years, Ono not only avoided further imprisonment, but also received compensation of 36.5 million yen from the state. The prosecution chose not to appeal and the case was officially closed. Ono's acquittal reflected Japanese society's deep concern for fairness in the judicial system. After his victory, Ono left the courtroom with a radiant smile, waving to the crowd of supporters. They cheered and applauded, celebrating his triumph. In an interview, Ono shared that he was young when he was arrested, but now at 54, his hair had thinned and his health had deteriorated. When asked about his plans after returning to normal life, he expressed his first wish to care for his elderly mother and push her wheelchair. He also said he would strive to exercise and work hard. The media, which had once labeled him a culprit, issued apologies one after another. Ono quickly became a wrongfully accused hero in the press. He was invited to give speeches across the country, sharing his story and encouraging others who had been wrongfully accused to fight for justice. True to his word in one interview, Ono Yojuo returned to work as a construction worker. He rented a small apartment near his mother and sister in Adaka Ward, balancing work with caring for his mother. However, he noticed that his favorite tongatsu, fried pork cutlet, and ramen had become more expensive. Half of his compensation was used to cover legal fees, and the remaining 10 million yen was managed by the Relief Association to support his future. The amount Ono Yojuo could freely use was about 8 million yen. But instead of living frugally, he squandered the money, frequently visiting bars. He once bragged to friends that he had received a large sum from the government and could live comfortably for years, even without working. One night, while drunk at an izakaya in Adaka Ward, he let slip something shocking, but everyone dismissed it as the ramblings of a drunk paying it no mind. Just 1 year after his release, Ono fell back into old habits, committing another theft. He broke the glass door of a real estate company and was caught red-handed, rummaging through the property inside. Once again, he was sent to prison. 2 years later, after serving his sentence, he returned to his apartment in Adaka Ward and found a job as a cleaner at Toner Park. The story returns to 1996. At the age of 59, Ono Yojuo once again found himself a suspect in a murder case. However, having once been hailed by the public as a wrongfully accused hero and backed by numerous organizations, the police hesitated to act without solid evidence, fearing a fierce backlash from the public. In the early 1990s, DNA technology began to be widely applied in criminal investigations. Compared to traditional methods like blood type testing or hair analysis, DNA evidence offered far greater reliability. However, at the time, DNA techniques still had limitations and their legal admissibility remained a contentious issue in courtrooms. As a result, the police proceeded with extreme caution in gathering evidence. To obtain Ono Yojuo's DNA, investigators disguised themselves as sanitation workers, covertly monitoring the trash area near his residence. One day, as Ono Yojuo discarded his garbage as usual, the investigators swiftly collected his trash bag, which contained plastic bottles, disposable chopsticks, tissues, and other personal items. They successfully extracted DNA from these items, and the results matched the DNA sample recovered from the blanket at the parking lot in Higashi Rokugo. While the investigation was underway, another incident occurred, further intensifying suspicions toward Ono. One night, residents in Adaka Ward discovered a 5-year-old girl unconscious in a park and immediately alerted the police. Fortunately, the girl was rushed to emergency care in time and narrowly escaped death. According to the victim's older sister, that evening, while the two sisters were playing in the park, a middle-aged man approached and invited them to play together. After a while, the older sister had to leave for an errand, and the man promised to take the younger girl to a more fun place. He then took her to another park where he exploited the darkness to assault her. When the girl began to cry, he covered her mouth and strangled her, causing her to lose consciousness before fleeing. Thankfully, a passerby found her in time. The incident took place just 330 feet from Ono Yojuo's home. A witness saw Ono Yojuo riding a bicycle with the girl, and both the victim and her sister confirmed that the man was indeed Ono Yojuo. The police arrested him immediately. During questioning, Ono Yojuo claimed he had no intention of killing the girl. He only wanted to stop her from screaming, so he covered her mouth. When he realized she had stopped breathing, he panicked and attempted CPR to revive her. To ensure she would be found, he deliberately left her in a busy area before leaving the scene. A few days later, the police searched Ono Yojuo's apartment. The interior was in disarray, filled with adult magazines, books, and videotapes. In the backyard, they discovered a saw and a buried human head. Forensic analysis confirmed that the head belonged to Maoka Yoshi, the victim murdered at the parking lot in Higashirotsuko. Inside the refrigerator, the police found additional body parts of the victim along with her identification documents. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Ono was forced to confess to his crimes. A few months before the murder, Ono Etsuo and Maoi Yoshi had met while he was working as a cleaner at Tannery Park. At the time, Muchoi Yoshi was living as a drifter in the park. She was born in the town of Asu, Nongura District, Ibaraki Prefecture, 18 years younger than Ono. In a strange twist of fate, Asu is located right next to Kitanura village, Ono's hometown. Previously, Maoi Yoshi had worked as a food store employee in a golf caddy. But after losing her job, she began a life of wandering. Ono, who had always yearned for a family, invited Mai Yoshi to live with him. At first, she was diligent, taking care of household chores with care. Trusting her, Ono gave her a key to the apartment and 3,000 yen daily to buy groceries. However, over time, Maoka Yoshi grew negligent, refusing to cook dinner and often going out at night. This led to frequent arguments between the two. The night before the murder, Maoi Yoshi once again failed to prepare dinner and didn't return home until 10:30 p.m. Ono flew into a rage, and the two argued fiercely until 2 a.m. Finally, Mai Yoshi declared she wanted to leave and demanded 2 million yen from Ono Yojuo as compensation for her housework. Realizing she had only lived with him for money, Ono Yojuo, in a fit of anger, attacked her with a baseball bat. After committing the crime, Ono Yotsuo felt remorse and decided to take Mucho Yoshi's ashes back to her hometown. So, the following midnight, he wrapped her body in a blanket, took it to the parking lot in Higashirotsuko, and set it on fire. A day later, he returned to check and found the body hadn't fully burned. So, he took the head back and buried it in his backyard. In 1998, the case went to trial at the Tokyo District Court. The defendant, Ono Yojuo, was charged with murder and several other crimes. The court determined that the defendant lacked empathy, displayed an aggressive personality, and posed a high risk of reoffending. At the prosecution's request, the court sentenced Ono Yojuo to life imprisonment. The defense attorney argued that the sentence was unjust and filed an appeal. A year later, the Tokyo High Court reviewed the case and emphasized that the suffering and terror endured by the victim were immeasurable. Ono's motive was classified as a crime of gratification, meaning the act itself was committed to satisfy the perpetrator's depraved desires. After killing the victim in a rage during their argument, he kept parts of her body in his home, possibly to fulfill some perverse pleasure. Ultimately, the Tokyo High Court upheld the original verdict, closing the case. This case sent shockwaves through the public, exposing Ono Ueso's true nature. The image of a wrongfully accused hero that he had once been celebrated for crumbled into a bitter irony. The relief committee that had once defended him became a target of public criticism. Many began to question if they hadn't helped Ono Ueso overturn his earlier conviction, would these subsequent tragedies have occurred? The case also sparked heated debates about the media's responsibility in the earlier Miyata-sai case. While the legal process was still ongoing, some newspapers hastily labeled Ono Ueso a serial killer, leading to the formation of the relief group and his eventual acquit at the appeal trial. Later, when Ono Ueso was declared not guilty, the media continued to glorify him as a wrongfully accused hero. Despite his criminal history of theft, arson, and other offenses, this blind glorification lulled society into a false sense of security, resulting in further heartbreaking tragedies. Many also suspected that Ono was the true culprit behind the series of shocking murders in Japan's capital region. However, because those crimes occurred before Japan's criminal law was amended in 2010, they were still subject to a maximum statute of limitations of 25 years. The capital region murders took place between 1968 and 1974, while Ono Ueso was only convicted in 1996. This meant that even if new definitive evidence emerged, he could no longer be prosecuted for those earlier crimes. Reports indicate that in prison, Ono has maintained a routine of physical exercise and frequently communicates with the media. At the end of each letter, he includes caring messages like, "Take care of your health or keep pushing forward," written in a gentle tone that starkly contrasts with the monstrous crimes he committed. In the past, it was the simplicity and warmth that convinced his supporters to believe in him, advocate for him, and fight to prove his innocence. But even now, they struggle to comprehend the true person hiding behind that ordinary facade. Currently, at 88 years old, Ono remains in prison, serving his sentence. He continues to adamantly deny any involvement in the series of shocking murders in the capital region. Story 4. Every city has its own urban legends and Shanghai is no exception. Not long ago, a famous Taiwanese YouTuber known as Wantong traveled to mainland China and live-streamed his journey. The trip quickly garnered massive attention from netizens on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. During the live stream, Wantong's group drove on Shanghai's elevated highway system. Notably, they passed by a particular spot twice, a location known only to longtime Shanghai residents. On the live stream screen, viewers easily spotted an unusual highway pillar. Instead of the monotonous design of others, this pillar was carved with dragon patterns from the Shang dynasty coiling around it and standing tall. This is Shanghai's famous dragon pillar, behind which lies a chilling urban legend that has persisted for decades. Today, let's turn back time and uncover the secrets behind this iconic structure. A thrilling tale that has consumed countless pages in Shanghai's folklore. In the 1990s, Shanghai entered a period of explosive economic growth. The population surged and the number of vehicles multiplied, leading to severe traffic congestion in the city center. To alleviate this pressure, the municipal government decided to embark on an unprecedented project, constructing an elevated highway system that would cover the entire city. This project was not just a technical advancement, but also carried symbolic significance. According to the plan, the highways would be built in the shape of the character Xin, an ancient nickname for Shanghai, symbolizing smooth flow and connectivity. Among them, the inner ring elevated road encircling the city center and the north-south elevated road running along Chunda Road with the two main axes. These two routes intersected at a central point later known as the Dragon Pillar. Here four levels of highways crisscrossed and stacked vertically to save space and optimize the structure. The design team opted for a bold single-pillar solution, meaning just one column would support the entire interchange. This pillar, with a diameter of 5 m and a height of 32 m, stood as a massive cylinder in the heart of the city. It's no exaggeration to call it the heart of Shanghai's elevated highway system. If this pillar were to fail, both the east-west and north-south routes would collapse instantly, paralyzing the city's traffic completely. To ensure durability, the engineers needed to build a solid foundation. They planned to drive 36 piles into the ground, each nearly 1 meter in diameter, arranged in 6 rows of 6 piles each. Each pile was to be 62 m deep, an impressive figure, reflecting the project's meticulousness. However, at the most critical moment of construction, when pile driving began, something completely unexpected happened. In September 1995, Shanghai sweltered under oppressive heat. At the highway interchange, the roar of machinery echoed as workers toiled day and night to meet deadlines. Their critical task erecting the main pillar, the heart of the project, where no mistakes could be afforded. The construction team, seasoned engineers with years of flawless collaboration, had sailed smoothly for months. But recently, a heavy unease settled over the site. The problem: the foundation. Massive piles driven by cutting-edge machines refused to sink deep into the ground. Some halted inexplicably after a few meters. Others disturbingly began rising back up as if an unseen force below resisted their intrusion. This defied the area's geology. Shanghai, built on the soft, porous alluvial plains near the Yangtze River's mouth, was ideal for deep pile driving. Every fix failed. New equipment, adjusted angles, increased of force. Nothing worked. One morning, the team leader ordered another attempt. The machine whirred, the pile descended. Hope flickered. Then a low ominous thud reverberated, followed by a strange liquid oozing from the ground, pooling ominously. The team leader halted the machine. But before it fully stopped, the pile shot upward without warning, terrifying the workers. Construction ground to a halt. Amid the confusion, a chilling rumor spread among the crew. Some whispered that the pile's resistance stemmed from disturbing something buried deep below. An older worker spoke bluntly. Through the Hangpu River area housed Shanghai's Dragon Vein, and their pile driving might have struck the dragon's head. The rumor grew, casting a grim, eerie pall over the site. Then stranger events unfolded. Days later, the site was abruptly sealed off, barriers blocking all views. The original workers were ordered to leave without explanation. From within, faint chants, the clack of prayer beads and long resonant bell tolls drifted out. 3 days later, the barriers came down. The workers returned stunned. A row of ceremonial offerings draped in vibrant red cloth lined the site. Nearby, an elderly monk in saffron robes supported by young acolytes, quietly emerged. He bowed to the workers and left without a word. The bizarre scene sparked hushed whispers, but no one dared probe further. A new team took over, machines roared back to life, and miraculously the pile driving proceeded flawlessly. All 36 piles sank perfectly into place. 3 months later, in December 1995, the project was complete. The colossal single pillar stood firm at the heart of Shanghai's highway interchange. But the story of this pillar was far from over. Days later, skilled artisans arrived. They encased the pillar in gleaming white steel and, with intricate relief techniques, carved swirling clouds and 9 golden 5-claw dragons. The dragons coiled from the base, spiraling upward toward the sky. From then on, Shanghai's residents called it the Dragon Pillar. The original workers, learning of the dragon carvings, felt a chill. Questions piled up about those sealed off 3 days. What truly happened in that mysterious window? Who was the elderly monk, and why was the pillar adorned with dragons? Steeped in funous symbolism, a mysterious legend began to spread among the people. It spoke of a monk named Ain who claimed to be the abbot of Fat Kuang Temple in Ningbo. He had trained under the revered elder monk Jin Chan, abbot of Shanghai's famous Jade Buddha Temple, located in Pua district about 3 kilometers northwest of the Dragon Pillar. The tale goes that Jin Chan himself was summoned to the construction site that year. Nearing 80, his profound spiritual wisdom earned him deep respect among Buddhists. While the Dragon Pillar was under construction, the Ping resided at the Jade Buddha Temple, practicing daily with his master. One September morning, after the early chanting session, Jahan abruptly gathered over 10 disciples, announcing a vital ritual. They headed straight to the Yan'an elevated highway site where the Dragon Pillar was rising. Ding joined the group. He vividly recalled the scorching sun and Jin Chan's stern silence as he set up a small altar at the site's edge, conducting a solemn ceremony. The ritual lasted 3 days and nights without pause. When it concluded, the group quietly returned to the Jade Buddha Temple. No strange phenomena occurred. Everything seemed eerily normal. Yet, one day after the ritual ended, something uncanny happened. Around 5 p.m., as the Ping greeted visitors at the temple, a deafening explosion shook the grounds. The sound rattled the Jade Buddha Temple, sending monks scrambling in panic. The Ping rushed toward the noise. What he saw was bizarre. The massive wooden beam above the temple's main gate had inexplicably collapsed. Whispers spread, unease grew. Many saw it as an ominous sign. Hours later, news arrived from the highway site. The first foundation pile for the Dragon Pillar had finally been driven successfully. When disciples reported this to Jahan, he merely nodded his calm demeanor, suggesting he had foreseen it all. Days later, Jahan suddenly packed his belongings, announcing a trip to his hometown in Dongga, Jiangsu. As abbot of the Jade Buddha Temple, his duties rarely allowed such leave. His timing puzzled many, but none dared question him deeply. Days later, Jahan suddenly packed his belongings, announcing a trip to his hometown in Dongga, Jiangsu. As abbot of the Jade Buddha Temple, his duties rarely allowed such leave. His timing puzzled many, but none dared question him deeply. After returning, Jin Chan resumed his routine at the temple, showing no signs of distress. 3 months passed since the Dragon Pillar ritual. On an early winter morning, before dawn, the temple bell rang as usual, its chime mingling with Shanghai's cold, damp air. Disciples rose for the morning chants in the Buddha hall. At 5 a.m., Jahan's door creaked open, clad in saffron robes. He stepped out with steady grace, his presence serene. But at the reclining Buddha hall's entrance, he stopped. In the stillness of dawn, he gently sat leaning to his right, head facing north, eyes toward the west. His left leg rested over his right hand, bent to cradle his head, left hand relaxed by his side. This was the auspicious reclining pose, the position in which the Buddha entered nirvana. Strangely, just days earlier, the dragon pillar project had been fully completed, standing as an enduring symbol of Shanghai. That same month, Gana-chan passed away. The news spread like wildfire, fueling cryptic rumors. Many believed that to ensure the dragon pillar's success, Jean Chan had paid the ultimate price, his own life. Folklore spun a chilling tale. The dragon pillar's site was said to lie atop Shanghai's Dragon Vein, home to a mystical subterranean dragon. When workers began driving piles, they unwittingly struck this sacred vein. The ground resisted unnaturally hard, defying all technical efforts to sink the piles. Desperate authorities turned to elder monk Jin Chan of the Jade Buddha Temple. With profound spiritual insight, he was believed to have glimpsed cosmic truths. He calculated, fingers tracing unseen patterns, pinpointing the moment the divine dragon would leave its vein to wander. That was the only window to drive the piles successfully. Other tales claimed he waited for the dragon to roll over, exposing its soft belly, the easiest spot to pierce. Either way, piercing the dragon vein was a grave offense against the divine. Beyond timing, a solemn ritual was needed to appease the dragon. With utmost reverence, legend holds that only absolute devotion and a great sacrifice could persuade the spirit to allow construction to proceed. Jean Shan led dozens of disciples in a 3-day, 3-night ritual without pause. He instructed that dragon carvings soaring upward be etched onto the pillar to link the subterranean vein with the heavens, preserving the land's vital energy. In 2009, as the internet flourished, a Tanya forum post thrust the dragon pillar back into the spotlight. The poster claimed a former colleague from the pile driving team witnessed mud erupting violently with each attempt halting progress. Only after monks performed their ritual did construction flow smoothly. The post exploded, amassing over 400,000 views and thousands of comments. Locals shared tales of living near the site. Some claimed relatives worked on the project, bolstering the story's credibility. Others posted a photo allegedly showing monks performing the ritual at the site. Later, it was debunked that the image was from near Koryang Road Station in Pua District, not the dragon pillar's location. Sadly, posts about the monks' ritual have vanished from the internet, leaving only oral tales, blurring the line between fact and fiction. Meanwhile, officials insisted the dragon pillar held no supernatural quirks as rumored. 17 years after the pillar's completion, a Dongfang reporter tracked down a key figure from the original construction, Jian Kaiying, a member of the Urban Construction Management Committee. He dismissed rumors of rising foundations or monks casting spells as pure fiction absent from his experience. He explained that the pillar officially coded PM 109 sat at the heart of the elevated interchange bearing the heaviest load. Its foundation was intricate, 36 piles were drilled within an octagonal area, each side 14.5 m long, directly beneath the main column. Like iron nails, these piles anchored the pillar, converging upward into its dragon-shaped form. The design ensured both structural strength and striking simplicity. The complex foundation caused relentless challenges. The densely packed piles compressed the soil, increasing underground friction. The equipment, limited by weak pile drivers and insufficient vibration strength, struggled to penetrate the deeper, harder soil layers. The challenges didn't end there. According to Jean Kaying, the Dragon Pillar's site stood where Du Xing's old villa once loomed, a notorious Shanghai gangster from decades past. Beneath the earth, wooden piles from that era, still unrotted, tangled in a chaotic web, thwarting new pile driving efforts. Jean Kaying insisted the team relied on science. They adjusted the foundation, removing 2/3 of the core soil from some piles to ease compression. At the base's 4 corners, they added 4 steel columns to bolster stability. With these changes, construction wrapped up smoothly, free of major setbacks. But doubts crept in. Some consulting old maps noted villa stood roughly 2 kilometers southwest of the Dragon Pillar, not directly beneath it. This sparked questions about the accuracy of earlier claims. Meanwhile, another key figure debunked the rumors. Jean Gunging, the crew chief reassigned to take over the Dragon Pillar's pile driving, spoke up. He stressed the job demanded extreme technical precision. The original team, though experienced, was versed in standard building projects, not the dense pile driving required for highways. Chang's team, fresh from driving 98 piles at the Suzhou River highway segment, was brought in. With coordinated support from authorities, they tackled the Dragon Pillar to conquer the technical hurdles. Chang's crew deployed 3 bold innovations. First, they swapped equipment for an 8-ton pile driver, amplifying impact to pierce the hard soil. Second, they pumped water during driving to lubricate the piles, easing their descent. Third, they drove piles continuously for 18-hour stretches, ensuring each sank deep in one relentless push. The plan worked instantly. In just 1 month and 5 days, all 36 piles were driven flawlessly, completing a seemingly impossible task. Notably, Chang's team was new, arriving after the initial crew's struggles. They had no knowledge of whether monks like Jehan or Ding were truly summoned for rituals. Despite scientific explanations, the Dragon Pillar's mystique endured. Beyond the pile-driving saga, the dragon carvings sparked the most curiosity. Why among Shanghai's thousands of highway pillars was this one uniquely adorned with an omen? Was it, as rumors claimed, a bridge to the cosmic dragon vein? Finally, the carving's designer spoke out to unravel the mystery. Xiao Xiong, a sculptor trained at the Shanghai Academy of Fine Arts, was over 50 and deputy director of the Shanghai Institute of Painting and Sculpture. During the project, he insisted the 9-5 claw dragons had no spiritual roots. It was about safety and aesthetics. Xiao explained that the pillar's massive 5 m diameter matching the lane's width sat at a critical interchange. Without distinct markings, it risked creating visual illusions for drivers, inviting accidents. The dragon carvings made it unmistakable while lending a majestic air harmonizing with Shanghai's culture. Thus, authorities opted to enhance the pillars Appearance. They enlisted Xiao Xiang, a master of relief sculpture, for the design. In 1990s, Shanghai, this marked a daring first, a major infrastructure project fused with artistic vision, blending engineering with beauty. Xiao Xiang explained the dragon motif with clarity. In ancient Chinese culture, dragons symbolize power, nobility, and auspicious fortune. A staple in sculpture and architecture, they were perfect for the dragon pillar positioned at Shanghai's most critical highway junction, a structure holding up the city. Through the 9 dragons soaring design, Xiao envisioned the highway as a colossal dragon weaving through the city, rising boldly to reflect the era's ambition. Stylistically, he chose Shan dynasty patterns, solemn, concise, yet brimming with strength. Paired with gleaming white steel, the design fused tradition with modernity, honoring national culture while embracing the new age. Technically, carving the pillar began far earlier than rumor suggested. The relief spanned 275 square meters, demanding precision and immense skill. For the 9 dragons soaring theme, Xiao analyzed drivers' perspectives from multiple angles, simulating traffic flow, to ensure the carvings didn't distract or endanger safety. He visited the site repeatedly, refining the design through relentless observation. This phase, Xiao recalled, was the most time-consuming. From concept to installation, the project stretched 10 months. The dragon pillar was completed in December 1995, while the rumored ritual occurred in September 1995. Yet, the dragon carvings began in February 1995, months before the alleged ceremony. This timeline undermines claims that monks like Jin Chen inspired the dragon motifs post-ritual. Still, the dragon pillars' legends persisted. One lingering question haunted many: was the mysterious monk's tale fact or a myth woven over time? Elder monk Jin Chen, a name that shook Buddhist circles, was real. Born Wang Haishu and Dongge Jiangsu, he was the 10th abbot of Shanghai's renowned Jade Buddha temple. He passed away in 1995 at 80, eerily coinciding with the rumored ritual sealing the dragon pillar at the city's vital highway site. Jin Chen was revered not just for spiritual depth, but for his benevolence, tirelessly supporting charities. A netizen shared that an elderly relative, a devote, visited the Jade Buddha temple after his passing. They received a booklet detailing Jihen's life, mentioning his role in the dragon pillar ritual. Yet, this booklet was never widely published, leaving the tale to oral whispers, deepening its mystique. The most detailed account came from another monk, Depaying of Buddha's Light Temple in Ningbo. But today, reliable information about the Ping is scarce. Only a blurry photo and scattered anecdotal posts remain. His existence and the truth of his claims can't be verified, leaving them as urban legends fragments. In 2024, crew chief Jin Gung resurfaced in the media detailing the construction's technical challenges. He described the soil from 25 to 47 m deep as a complex mix of mud and hard layers like a layered cake. Every 3 to 4 meters of mud lay a band of tough soil. The initial crew hitting these hard layers often paused, disrupting the process, a cardinal sin in construction. The original team proposed design changes, but as the pillar was the highway's highest load-bearing point, the Design Institute refused. When Zhang took over, his new team maxed out the machinery's power, and continuously pumped water to reduce friction. Success followed swiftly. Jean's explanation seemed to debunk the spiritual tales. Yet, a netizen commented cryptically. His words only prove the piles truly couldn't be driven down. Truth and myth intertwine. Is this tale mere legend or reality? Each of us may hold a different answer, but this ambiguity lends Shanghai a unique allure. Not just a city of highways and skyscrapers, but a place of deep unsolved mysteries waiting to be explored. Story 5. Now we unravel a chilling case that rocks Singapore to its core. On the quiet evening of January 6, 1979, a family in the Topo housing estate plummeted into an unimaginable tragedy. When the father returned home after a long day's work, he was met with a gut-wrenching sight. His 4 young children, 3 boys and 1 girl, aged 5 to 10, sprawled lifeless in the bathroom. Their bodies stacked at top one another, each pierced by dozens of stab wounds. No note. No clear clues. The apartment showed no signs of being ransacked. But strangest of all, one child still clutched a fistful of hair. As if their final desperate act was to point to the killer. This case sent shockwaves through the Lion City only to fade into obscurity over 4 long decades. The murder has never been brought to justice. And the question lingers, who could commit such a savage act against innocent children? Why? After breaking away from the Federation of Malaysia in 1965, Singapore under the iron-fisted leadership of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew surged into an era of rapid economic growth. The nation boasted cutting-edge infrastructure, advanced transportation and telecommunications, high per capita income, and a pristine, civilized urban landscape. This drew waves of tourists and immigrants from across the globe. To tackle the housing crisis sparked by a booming population, the Singapore government rolled out its public housing policy known as HDB. Flats. Built by the Housing and Development Board, these flats were sold to citizens at subsidized rates. Affordable, strategically located, and pivotal in easing the housing crunch, HDB flats now house over 80% of Singapore's population. The family at the heart of today's story lived in one such HDB flat. On the 5th floor of Block 58, Galing View, lived the Tan family of 6. The father, Tan Kant Tai, 36, was a driver. The mother, Lying, 32, worked as a ticket inspector. Every morning, the couple fied neighborhood kids to school in their vehicle. That Saturday morning, January 6, 1979, started like any other, no hint of the horror to come. Though it was the weekend, primary school students still had classes. At around 6:35 a.m. after breakfast, Tan Khan, Tai, and Lee Mang kissed their 4 sleeping children goodbye and set off to drive the other kids to school as they always did. By law, leaving young children home alone was prohibited. But back then, for many working families, balancing income and child care was a brutal challenge. Reluctantly, some parents, including the Tans, left their kids at home, locking the door or asking relatives or neighbors to check in. The Tan family had 4 children and the eldest son, Tan Ko Ping, and 10, a primary 5 student. The second son, Tan Ko Hung, 8 in primary 2. The third son, Tan Ko Thuan, 6 in primary 1, and the youngest, their daughter, Tan Tran Yi, 5. The three boys attended Minri school near their home. Little Tranny was set to start kindergarten the following Monday. Her bag and supplies were already prepared, but tragedy struck just 2 days before her first day of school. At around 7:10 a.m., 35 minutes after leaving home, Tan Kai pulled the car over. As usual, Li Mang called home to wake the kids for school. The phone rang and rang. No one answered. A flicker of unease hit her, but she brushed it off. Maybe the kids were still fast asleep. She'd try again later. Throughout the morning, the couple called home repeatedly at different times, but the result was the same silence. Growing anxious, Li Mang reached out to a neighbor, Ms. Tan, who lived nearby, asking her to check on the children. Between 8:30 and 9 a.m., Ms. Tan arrived at the Tan's door and knocked loudly. Nothing. The apartment was eerily silent. She peered through the window, but the curtains were drawn tight, blocking any view inside. In 1979, mobile phones didn't exist, so Ms. Tan couldn't contact Li Mang on the spot. She returned home planning to head to the market and informed the couple later. Meanwhile, on the school shuttle bus, Li Mang had no inkling of the horror unfolding. She trusted her neighbor had woken the kids as requested. So, after finishing the morning school run, she and her husband didn't rush home to check. Instead, they stuck to their routine, fing factory workers from nearby plants after their morning shifts. At 9:59 a.m., the Tans finally returned home. Li Mang unlocked the door, but as she stepped inside, dread crept in. The children's school bags sat untouched on the small living room table. Their shoes hadn't budged. A chilling unease gripped her. As she passed the kitchen, heading toward the bathroom at the back, the sight before her shattered her world. Her 4 children, drenched in blood, riddled with stab wounds, piled atop one another on the floor. The gruesome scene sent her collapsing, her screams tearing through the apartment. Hearing her cries, neighbors rushed over and immediately called the police. The first officer arrived at 10:04 a.m. Confronted by the ghastly scene, he urgently radioed for backup. Soon the criminal investigation department CD dispatched its special crimes unit along with a swarm of officers and investigators to the scene. Among them was seasoned investigator Simon Supia with 14 years of case-cracking experience. When he reached Block 58, Galang Baru, a crowd of curious onlookers had already gathered, nearly blocking the entrance. Once a security cordon was set up, Supia ascended to the 5th floor. To understand the case, let's examine the layout of the Tan family's apartment. The front door opened into a spacious living and dining area, the heart of the home. Beyond the kitchen lay the bathroom and a small bedroom at the rear. With only one bedroom, Tan Kai and Lemming slept on a bed while their 4 children spread mats on the floor in the same room. At the scene, Supia's first observation was striking. The apartment had 2 doors, a wooden inner door, and an outer iron security gate. Neither showed signs of forced entry. Inside, the living and dining areas were pristine with no evidence of rummaging or struggle. The children's school bags remained untouched on the table. A small fish tank with 2 fish swimming calmly sat nearby, an eerie contrast to the carnage. But when Supia reached the bathroom and saw the 4 children, He was floored. Their frail bodies were stacked atop one another. The eldest Tan Kok Ping lay at the bottom. The youngest Tan Tranny was on top. Each child's face was unrecognizable, marred by countless wounds, blood pooling everywhere. Later, Supia would call this the most horrific case of his career. Nothing else came close. By 11:40 a.m., two renowned forensic experts, Dr. Chao Zicheng and Dr. Wang Kim, arrived. Examining the children's wounds, they determined the killer used two distinct knives. One was likely a cleaver or large butchering knife. The eldest Tan Kok Ping bore 25 to 26 stab wounds across his head, face, and torso. His right hand was nearly severed, hanging by a thin strip of flesh. His left hand clutched a fistful of hair, evidence of a desperate struggle with the killer. The second son, Tanko Hung 8, had fatal wounds to the back of his head, neck, and abdomen. His skull was cracked, nearly split in two by a single brutal blow. The third son, Tankoan, 6, endured over 20 wounds across his body. The youngest Tun Tron, just 5, wasn't spared. She bore over 20 deep stabs, many to her face. Heartbreakingly, her tiny hands still gripped her favorite pillow, as if in her terror, it was her only solace. Police theorized the killer had roughly woken her from sleep or dragged her to the bathroom. Each child suffered at least 20 fatal wounds. Yet, even after killing them, the murderer's rage didn't stop. He kept stabbing as if unleashing a torrent of fury. At the scene, police found traces of blood in the kitchen sink, suggesting the killer washed their hands and body there. A thorough inventory revealed no theft. Nothing was disturbed, ruling out robbery as a motive. But one detail stood out. A kitchen knife was missing. Comparing the wounds, police concluded the killer brought a sharp blade clearly prepared for the act. Then passing through the kitchen, they grabbed another knife from the Tan's home. The killer likely dragged one child to the bathroom first, locking the others in the bedroom. After killing the first with the kitchen knife, they repeated the process, bringing each remaining child to the bathroom to meet the same fate. Based on rigor mortis, the forensic team estimated the murders occurred between 6:30 and 7 a.m., mere minutes after the Tans left for work. The killer likely lurked nearby waiting. This led police to suspect the perpetrator knew the family. The children opening the door didn't hesitate. They may even have welcomed the killer with smiles. But the chilling question remains among the Tan's acquaintances who harbored such venomous hatred to slaughter for innocent children. Under pressure from a swelling crowd of residents and media at the housing estate, the police held a press conference at the scene to calm the public. To protect the investigation, they released only bare details. 4 children from the Tan family had been brutally murdered. Specifics were kept under wraps with additional fragments later revealed by reporters or the victims' relatives. A critical clue emerged: a tuft of hair. This detail came from Tran Konthi's brother Tran Taiwan on January 8, 2 days after the killings. He recounted that after receiving the devastating news, he and the family went to identify the bodies at the police's arrangement. Examining Tong Ping, the 10-year-old eldest son, he noticed the boy's left hand tightly clutching a 10-12 centimeter strand of hair. Tran Taithuan was certain it didn't belong to the boy, suggesting it could belong to the killer. In his final desperate struggle for life, Kokping had fought back, yanking hair from the murderer. Rumors swirled that a neighbor on the sixth floor of the opposite building saw the youngest Tun Tran Ni fleeing the bathroom only to be grabbed and dragged back inside. The neighbor dismissed it as parental discipline, unaware it was the girl's final moment. Yet, despite police appeals through media and the press conference, this witness never surfaced. No one confirmed the sighting, leaving the story of TR's desperate escape unverified truth or mere gossip. More chilling still, the savagery of the crime was unmatched. The killer struck all 4 children, each enduring over 20 stab wounds. Yet, no one in the building heard a sound. A relative of the Tuns later shared that several police officers lived on the 5th floor where the tragedy unfolded. They often greeted or played with the kids in passing. None could fathom the horror that struck that day. Some officers, shaken to their core, wept silently. To crack the case swiftly, the Criminal Investigation Department, CD, mobilized its top investigators, forming a special task force led by Deputy Director Yim Leong. The team split into groups working in parallel, and they sent evidence, hair, fingerprints, blood, clothing to the lab for analysis while questioning Tun Khan, Tai Luming, and hundreds of residents. Waves of neighbors were brought to C headquarters for interrogation. The most critical step was grilling Tun Kai and Luming. Investigators demanded a detailed account of their day, financial records, and social connections. Especially anyone they'd clashed with. Had their school bus business sparked envy? Had they made enemies? The C was certain this wasn't a random crime. The killer took nothing, ruling out robbery. This was vengeance. A veteran investigator not directly involved told the press he shared the C's view this was a hat-driven murder. The killer likely knew the family, perhaps visited their home, and was familiar to the children who opened the door without hesitation. They also knew the parents' schedule, executing the massacre in a tight window. During questioning, Tun Khan, Tai, and Lum insisted they were on good terms with relatives, friends, and neighbors. They couldn't imagine who could harbor such cruelty. Tun Kai revealed they left home early that morning to pick up passengers rushing out and forgetting to lock the outer gate. He also mentioned a lost key they'd never replaced, suspecting the killer might have had access to it. This matched another lead. A neighbor, Ms. No, told police that a month before the murders, Lame mentioned losing a key. Too busy or unwilling to spend on a new lock, they hadn't replaced it. If the killer had found that key, it would explain the lack of forced entry. Lemang told investigators that when she left that morning, the children were fast asleep on the bedroom floor. Seeing her youngest Tran Ni cramped among her brothers, she felt a pang of guilt and moved her to the bed for comfort. On the second day after the murders, police swept the area, summoning several women from the neighborhood to CI headquarters. 2 in their 30s and 40s were suspected of financial disputes with the Tuns. Lu Minjing had run a TAN team, a common trust-based savings pool, popular in Fujian, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia in the last century. Such schemes relying on mutual trust were risky and are now illegal in many countries as unauthorized fundraising. Lu Min was the head of the TAN team with participants called FET. Rumors pointed to 2 women, both FET, who owed significant sums. One SGD 1,000, approximately $750. In June 2025, the other over SGD 3,000 approximately $2,250. Lamang had repeatedly pressed them for repayment despite promises they stalled, still owing when the murders occurred. A source told police that one woman surnamed Pa had a heated argument with Lang days before the tragedy, though the reason was unclear. Could this debt-fueled conflict have driven her to hire someone to slaughter the children in revenge? The Singapore police kept details of the case tightly guarded, especially witness statements. But that didn't stop the press. Reporters camped out at C headquarters and the crime scene, pouncing on anyone leaving an interrogation. Tona Lamang or neighbors for interviews. Their detailed reports gripped the public. Were these accounts identical to police statements? Did they embellish the truth? Hard to say. According to January 1979 news reports, one summoned neighbor, Mrs. Sue, lived opposite the town's apartment. When investigators asked if she heard strange noises or saw anyone suspicious entering or leaving that morning, she said no. But when reporters probed about the Tanteen savings pool, Mrs. Sue clammed up, refusing to comment. The second neighbor, Mrs. Pa, spoke to the press on January 11, 5 days after the murders. She and her husband, parents of 3, had lived on the 7th floor for 3 years. She often ran into Lamang in the stairwell, striking up a friendship. After a few chats, Lu invited her to join the 10 team. Initially, contributions were SGD 20 per round, rising to SGD 30 in the year before the murders, $15 to $22.50. Based on June 2025 rates. Mrs. Pa said the families were close. Their kids played together. On January 6, around 6:30 a.m., she took one of her children to the ground floor for the school bus. After the bus arrived, she returned to her 7th floor apartment. It wasn't until 10:30 a.m., hearing commotion in the hallway, that she learned the Tun children had been slaughtered. Strangely, she heard no screams or cries for help that morning. The next day, January 7, SETI brought Mrs. Pa and her husband in for questioning at 8 a.m. They waited until 6 p.m. to be interviewed, joining dozens of others at headquarters. Mrs. Pa told reporters the questions focused on the Tan social connections and Tanteen disputes. She admitted to a gambling habit and owing the Tanteen SGD $175. Not SGD $750 as rumored. Lamang had covered the debt herself. When asked about their reported argument, Mrs. Pa confirmed a heated clash with Lamang over her late payments sparked by financial struggles. Lee's persistent demands frustrated her, but she insisted they reconciled with no lingering bad blood. A peculiar detail emerged. C asked Mrs. Pa if she saw a charcoal cellar used for cooking fuel at the estate that day. She hadn't. The question left her wondering if police suspected a charcoal vendor's involvement. In the days that followed, police questioned over 100 residents. Nearly every tenant in the building. Another neighbor, surnamed Tran, recalled a strange man knocking on her door 5 days before the murders. When she answered, he claimed he'd knocked by mistake and left quickly. She wasn't sure if he was connected to the case. A 60-year-old woman who often sat in the corridor chatting with neighbors said she always noticed strangers but on the morning of the murders around 8 a.m., she was indoors washing her hair. Missing anything unusual? Another fifth-floor resident, Tranyo Thiu, told reporters that on January 15, 5 days before the killings, a stranger knocked on her door around 5 p.m. Her youngest son nearly opened it, but she stopped him. Through the iron gate, she saw a young man lurking suspiciously. When she asked what he wanted, he held 2 bottles, mumbling incoherently. When she pressed, "Who are you looking for downstairs?" he bolted. Tranyotha shared this with police, unsure if it was relevant. Another neighbor, Mrs. No, close to the Vans, spoke to the press. She said the family lived in Bales before moving to Galing View 4 or 5 years ago. Tona once drove deliveries for a steel shop on Veerasamy Road, while Lum worked in a leather garment factory. They married for love, not through arrangement. Mrs. No noted occasional spats, not over money or infidelity, but about their kids. With 4 children, often mischievous trouble was common. Mrs. No explained that Luang disciplined the kids with scolding or light smacks, while Tun Kantai was softer defending them. This sparked minor arguments, but their love and devotion to their children shone through. Mrs. No described Lu as blunt but warm. 2 weeks before the murders, a neighbor gave Lu SGD $100.75 to pay their utility bill. Lu misplaced the money on a cluttered table and ended up covering it herself. To Mrs. No, Lu was generous, not the type to make enemies. She couldn't fathom who could hate the family enough to commit such a heinous act. A neighbor choosing anonymity revealed a chilling detail. Months before the murders, the Tan family faced a failed break-in. A man posing as a utility worker claimed he was checking the plumbing and wiring. Tun Kantai and Lumming were out leaving their 4 children and a neighbor's kid at home. When the children opened the door, the man demanded, "Where's the wallet?" When they said they didn't know, he rummaged through drawers and tried the cabinet. The neighbor's child, quick thinking, ran for help, scaring the intruder off. The most promising lead came on January 14, 8 days after the massacre. A taxi driver contacted police claiming he may have driven the killer. Around 8 a.m. that fateful morning, while passing Block 96 Galing Baru, he picked up a man in his 20s acting suspiciously. Blood stained the left side of his body. He looked panicked, exhausted, pressing himself against the car door, panting heavily. The driver asked, "What happened to you? Why the blood?" At Lavender Road, he demanded to get out. As he exited, a metallic clank echoed. That a knife handle protruded from his waistband, its blade hitting the car door. Based on his accent and appearance, the driver suspected the man was Malaysian. Police asked him to identify the suspect among local residents. Shockingly, he pointed to a young man living on the same floor as the Tans just a few apartments away. Tan Kai recognized him instantly, a Malaysian who lived with his sister, often borrowing the Tan's phone. He was close with the kids who called him uncle. The Tans had no disputes or debts with him. Police investigated the Malaysian for 2 weeks, but lacking solid evidence released him. Soon after, he and his sister left the estate, returning to Malaysia, vanishing without a trace. Was he the killer? Many believed so for compelling reasons. First, the driver picked him up at Block 96, Galing View, just 350 m from the crime scene at Block 58, a 5-minute walk. The 8 a.m. pickup matched the killer's likely escape window. Second, the eldest victim, Tan Kok Ping, had his right arm nearly severed. This suggested a direct attack with blood likely splattering the killer's left side, matching the driver's description. Third, the driver had no reason to lie. He gained nothing from his tip and confidently identified the man among numerous suspects. Did the police let the killer slip away? Yet, doubts lingered. Tan Kai insisted he had no feud with the Malaysian taxi drivers often glued to radio news would have heard about the murders. Why did it take 8 days for this driver to report? If he feared retaliation, a few days delay wouldn't help. Another puzzle. If the Malaysian was the killer, why risk strolling through the estate, bloodied and armed, to catch a taxi at Block 96? He could have returned to his apartment, changed clothes, and hidden the weapon unnoticed. Why parade his guilt in broad daylight? Singapore's Shame Daily News ran a bold front-page claim police knew the killer's identity. They alleged a young man was the culprit. A lead supposedly uncovered by Lemmy herself. The paper tied the murders to 4D lottery disputes and money conflicts. The 4D lottery, hugely popular in Singapore, involves picking a 4-digit number from 0000 to 99.999. 10,000 possibilities. Reports spun a dramatic tale. The suspect won SGD $1.50000 to 37,500. In June 2025. In 1979 with an average annual salary of SGD $390. $299.50 or SGD $330 monthly $247.50. This was a fortune. The story went that the suspect had a woman buy his 4D ticket. When he demanded it, she claimed it was lost, saying an underground bookie took the winnings. Later, when she bought a school bus matching the Tan's business, his suspicions grew. He believed she cashed his prize, fueling a vengeful rampage against her children. Despite the paper's confident tone, no arrest was made by January 18. Rumors escalated. Reports claimed the killer was about to be caught, hinting at an injured suspect under treatment. As misinformation spread, police intervened, denying they'd identified the killer and confirming the case remained open. 2 weeks after the murders, Tan Kon Tai received a chilling Lunar New Year card. Its cover showed children playing joyfully. Inside the message was sinister. Now you're childless. Haha. Signed the killer. It addressed the couple as a Thai and a intimate nicknames. The Tans were terrified. The phrase childless carried weight. After their youngest, Tant Ronnie was born, Lai Maying, feeling 4 children were enough, underwent sterilization. How did the killer know this? The use of nicknames, Atai and Aang, convinced police the murderer was someone close, deeply familiar with the family. Who could harbor such venom? One detail casts doubt on the Malaysian suspect. If the timing of the Lunar New Year card is accurate, he couldn't be the killer. The taxi driver reported him 8 days after the murders and police detained him for 2 weeks until the 3rd week post-crime. Yet, the card was sent in the 2nd week while he was in custody. Unless he had an accomplice or supernatural powers, The timeline doesn't add up. Police likely compared the card's handwriting to suspect scripts, finding no match. She daily. News reporters pressed the Tans. Had they made enemies, offended anyone? The couple sighed, shaking their heads. Exhausted from relentless said interrogations, they'd snapped under pressure. They swore they had nothing, having spilled everything they knew. Yet some overheard family members grilling Tan Kantai. Why didn't you report to the police sooner? Or if you had, things might have been different. This report clearly wasn't about the massacre, but something earlier. What stopped Tan Kai from alerting police? When reporters probed relatives, they clammed up, claiming ignorance. After the tragedy, the Tans didn't flee their haunted apartment. They stayed driving the same school bus. Neighbors glimpsed them through the window, eating silently with 4 extra plates and chopsticks set for their lost children. The sight broke hearts. Soon, the couple couldn't bear driving, seeing other kids, and remembering their own. They sold the business. Nights were spent clinging to each other weeping. They later took factory jobs and tried their hand at a plastics business. Rumors swirled that they sought to adopt a boy and girl, but found no suitable children. 4 years later, in a twist of fate, Lima Younging underwent surgery to reverse her sterilization. Miraculously, after years of being unable to conceive, she became pregnant. On December 30, 1983, she gave birth to a healthy boy. The family of 3 quietly faded from public view. 46 years later, the Tan children's massacre remains unsolved. One of Singapore's most infamous cold cases. Speculation and theories have never ceased. Some whisper of an extramarital affair. Could Lai Mei Ying's lover, wanting her to leave her family, have learned of her sterilization and felt betrayed, enraged? Did he slaughter her children in revenge? The most persistent rumor, though, is darker. The Tans knew the killer's identity. How else could the murderer know about Lee's sterilization? Such deep-seated hatred suggests a close connection. Why their silence? What held them back? The most plausible theory points to a grave crime. Singapore's laws are merciless, especially for capital offences. The Tans might have been entangled in illegal activities like drug trafficking. If the killer knew this, it would explain their silence. Exposing the murderer could unravel their own crimes, risking execution. Singapore's strict drug laws make this chillingly plausible. Police found no fingerprints or clear traces of the killer. Only blood, clothing, and other evidence. DNA analysis introduced in Singapore in 1990, 11 years after the murders, wasn't advanced enough then, and evidence degrades over time. Whether future forensic breakthroughs could crack the case remains uncertain. Shockingly, forensic expert Dr. Chow Zhu Chong revealed the hair clutched by victim Tan Kok Ping was his own, not the killer's. But why did the boy grab his own hair in agony? Or did the killer plan it to mislead investigators? After the tragedy, mourners visited the children's graves, leaving flowers and toys a touching tribute. Yet, some came with darker motives. Fueled by reports linking the murders to 4D lottery winnings, gamblers paid respects, believing the Tan's supposed jackpot led to their deaths. They hoped offerings would bring luck and a winning ticket. In 2021, 42 years later, Singapore's non-profit crime library revived the case. To spark public interest, urging those with secrets to come forward. It drew attention. A former neighbor shared 3 details. The murders happened on the 5th floor, not the 4th, as some reports claimed. Lying wasn't a native Singaporean, and her real name was Lai Mok, not Lai Maying. Though minor, these corrections were valuable, a rare voice breaking decades of silence. More such voices could unlock the case. That same year, Shiming Daily News tracked down Lying, now over 70, living with her grandson. Her husband, Tan Tai, had passed away, never seeing justice. When asked if she hoped for a breakthrough, she paused, eyes welling with tears, and said cryptically, "Some things once known change nothing." Some saw this as letting go. Others sensed she knew the killer's identity. Most in her shoes would vow to never give up. Why didn't she? Her words hinted at a deeper truth. The case leaves countless questions unanswered. For those involved, the wounds may have closed, buried in the past. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at Mr. Night Cared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.